Hi everyone, my name is Ben Moss and I am a Tableau and Alteryx consultant for the Information Lab. This is the first in a series of webinars which are designed to give some guidance on installing, configuring and working with the Alteryx Server product. Now before we even consider installing Alteryx Server, we must first actually create an environment, whether physical or virtual, to install it on. Now in this case we are going to deploy our Alteryx Server into an AWS or Amazon Web Services environment, and the process of launching and configuring this environment is what we're going to be covering in this first video. So let's navigate to AWS and sign in. Now if you don't already have an account, it's really easy to set up. You just need some personal details and of course a credit or debit card so they can bill you some money. Once logged into AWS, let's navigate to the AWS Management Console where we can see the array of services which they offer. The service we are interested in this case is EC2 or Elastic Computer Cloud. This is essentially Amazon's virtual server machines. Once you're on the EC2 page, we can then select Launch Instance. We will then be asked to select an AMI or Amazon Machine Image for our virtual server. This is essentially the operating system for our machine. Now, according to Alteryx's technical specification, which I have open here, we are in need of a Windows server because Alteryx only supports Windows at present, and the version should be 2008 or later. So what I'm going to do is search for an operating system or AMI which uses that operating system. And if I scroll down, I come across the Windows Server 2019 from Microsoft. So I'm going to choose this version. The next step of the process is to choose an instance type. In AWS there are hundreds of instance types containing an array of different CPU and memory combinations, and they can be configured and optimized in different ways. For example, they have compute optimized machines or memory optimized machines. For the purpose of this exercise, I'm just going to select a general purpose instance, and then I'm going to use the technical specification again to guide me on the number of CPUs and how much memory we need for our virtual machine. So the number of cores required, it says quad core, so we need a minimum of 4 cores, and we also require a minimum of 16 gigabytes of RAM. Now, something that's really important in most virtual environments is that they actually use something known as virtual CPUs. Now, for every 2 virtual CPUs, there is 1 normal CPU. So actually, we're looking for 8 virtual CPUs with a minimum of 16 gigabytes of RAM. This will bring us to the M5.2x large instance type. So let me just find that from our list. So this one here, and you actually see it has 32 gigabytes of RAM, so it's actually a bit beefier than it needs to be, which is fine. I'm then going to hit Next and configure the instance details. On this page, we can control some details specific to launching a server in an AWS environment. For example, we have the possibility to launch more than 1 instance at a time. But perhaps most importantly, we can specify the network and subnet that we want to launch our machine into. The VPC or Virtual Private Cloud is a subject well worth reading into before you even consider launching your machine, and I'll drop some links to the content that covers these subjects into the video description. I'm just going to leave all of the instance details with their default settings and hit Next, Add Storage. When it comes to disk storage added to your machine, by default you have one titled root. This is the disk which the operating system is actually installed on. With Alteryx Server, again, looking at the technical specification, it requires a recommended minimum of 1 terabyte of disk size. So what we're going to do is add a second volume with 1000 gigabytes of size, and I'm actually going to select the delete on termination option so that the disk is destroyed when my server is destroyed as well. You might want to check that box with caution or not check it at all. And I'm then going to hit next, add tags. In this case, I'm just going to create 2 tags, one of which indicates the project that I'm working on, and the second, the author, which is myself. So I'm going to hit add tag, create a tag called project, and put the value as Alteryx Server demo. I'm going to add a second tag with myself as the author. Now I can apply these tags both against the instance that I'm creating, so my EC2 machine, and also the disk volumes that we've created. So I'm applying this against 3 assets, our single EC2 machine, and then our 2 disk volumes that we're creating at the same time. I'm then going to move on to the security group settings, which is one of the most important things when launching an EC2 instance, because it allows us to define what and who can connect to it. So by default, AWS will create a new security group, but if you have one already configured, then you can select it just at the top here. In this case, I'm going to create a brand new security group, and I'm going to give it a name as well. So Alteryx Server Demo Security Group. And I'll just give it a description, Alteryx Server Security Group Roles. Now, by default, there is a rule already on our machine that allows RDP, or remote access to the server box. At present, this is set to use any, or the traffic is set to come from any IP address in the world. Now, in a real-world scenario, you're likely going to want to lock that down to just a subset of people within your organization. So it'd be worth maybe using the IP address of the network in your office, and potentially some remote workers as well. I'm going to select this to use my IP just for the purpose of this exercise. What I'm going to do is also add a second rule which allows HTTP traffic to connect to our server. Remembering, Alteryx Server is a web-based product in the form of the Alteryx Gallery. Again, you might want to be restrictive on the source of the traffic, likely wanting to restrict it to the IP range of your office network. In my case, again, I'm going to select the My IP option. So I'm going to find HTTP in the drop-down, which is port 80, and then I'm going to select My IP. There's one final rule that we may want to add here, which is against port 270.18. This is the port used by Mongo database, which is installed with Alteryx Server, and opening this port will allow us to perform usage analysis from the comfort of our local machine on the Mongo database which is installed. So I'm going to add a rule. I'm going to specify the port 270.18, and then again I'm going to restrict it to just my IP address. I'm then going to hit the review and launch option. Once you've reviewed the technical information that you have here and you are happy, let's launch our machine. Now, something that says to us at the top in a big amber box is your instance configuration is not eligible for the free usage tier. AWS is a paid service and it will cost you money, so make sure you look at the implications of costs before you even consider moving through this process. So I'm going to hit launch. Now, before we even are allowed to launch our machine, we're going to be asked to create or select an existing key pair. This key pair will allow us to access key information about our server. Now, if you're creating one, make sure that you do not lose it, else you will lose any ability to manage your environment effectively. So I'm going to create a new key pair. I'm going to call it Alteryx Server Demo Key Pair. And then I'm going to hit download and save it. Once I'm happy that I've saved it somewhere that I know I have access to, I'm then going to hit launch instances. Once you've done this step, if we navigate to the instances console, we will see that our server is initializing. I'm going to put a pause on this until our server is launched successfully and that the checks are marked as complete. Once your EC2 instance is up and running, there are a few admin tasks we need to perform before we get down and dirty with the environment we've just created. the first thing we should do is give our EC2 instance a name and make sure you follow any naming conventions that are in place with your business. In this case, I'll just call mine Alteryx Server Demo EC2. We also need to perform that same task against the disk volumes that we've attached to our server machine. This can be done by going to the Elastic Block Store option on the left side and then hitting volumes. Now, you might have a long list of all of the different volumes that are assigned to different servers in your AWS environment. In that sort of scenario, you want to use the attachment information to understand what EC2 instance they are connected to. So in this case, I just have the 2 disk volumes that we've just created, and they are both attached to our Alteryx Server Demo EC2 machine. So I'm going to give each of these a unique name. Now you'll notice one of these is obviously 30 gigabytes in size and one is 1 terabyte in size. So I'm going to name these slightly differently. I'm going to call this one Alteryx Server Demo C, because it's essentially the C disk which contains the operating system. And then I'm going to call this one Alteryx Server Demo E, because when I map this virtual disk to my server machine, I'm going to map it to the E drive just from a personal preference point of view. I'm just going to hit the check option, and then I'm going to move back to the Instances tab. Now when I select the instance that we've just created, something that you can see at the bottom is the public DNS and the IP address of our server machine. Now, with a cloud deployment, specifically with AWS, every time that the server restarts, it's going to be assigned a new public DNS. To prevent this issue arising, we must assign our EC2 instance with something known as an elastic IP. This process will provide us with a static IP address which we can then reference. So on the left side, I'm going to go to Network and Security and then go to Elastic IPs. I may have a list of existing IPs which I can associate immediately to my EC2 instance. Alternatively, if you don't have any available or you want to create a brand new one, then you want to hit Allocate Elastic IP Address. I'm going to choose one from Amazon's pool of IP addresses, and I'm going to hit Allocate. Now I'm going to get the previous page, but pre-filtered to the IP address that we've just created. And then what we need to do is associate this with our machine. So the way to do that is make sure you've got the IP that you want to associate selected. Then go to Actions and Associate Elastic IP Address. On this page, you can then do a search for your EC2 instance. Of course, in my console, I only have one available, so I'm just going to select this top one. And then I'm going to hit Associate. So if we remember this public IP address, 3.10.69.9, if I then go to the Instances tab, you'll now see that my public DNS reflects that elastic IP that I've just assigned to it. So even when the server restarts or terminates and then we have to manually bring it back up, it's always going to have that same public DNS, meaning anyone who has that link to remote into it or that link to go to the internet browser to see our Alteryx gallery doesn't have to change their link every time, which would of course be mildly problematic. So the final thing that we need to do before we can actually remote into our machine is get the remote access credentials. So the way we do that is we select our machine on the Instances pane. We then go to Actions and Get Windows Password. Now this is where the key pair file is needed, or one example of where it's needed. So what it asks us to do is load it. So I'm going to hit Browse. I'm going to find the key pair that I've just created. It's actually in my downloads, Alteryx Server Demo key pair. And then I'm going to hit the Decrypt Password option. This is going to present me with the Windows credentials, which will allow me to have remote access to my machine. Once I've got those credentials, I'm then going to remote access into my machine, and I'll see you at that point. Once you've remoted into your server machine, there are a few more things to do before we download and install Alteryx Server. The first thing I'm going to do is open File Explorer. What you'll notice, if I go to this PC, is that we only have one of our 2 disk drives mounted at present. Our 1 terabyte additional volume is not there, so let's resolve that issue. What I'm going to do is, on the Windows icon in the bottom left, I'm going to right click and go to Disk Management. From here it's going to say that I need to additionalize my second disk, which is titled Disk 1. And so to do this, I'm just going to hit OK. And then what you'll see is that disk 0 is our 30 gigabyte drive. If I hit the down arrow, I can then right click in this space here and create a volume from our 1 terabyte disk. So I'm going to hit New Simple Volume, and I'm just going to move through the wizard. So I'm going to hit Next, Next. It then asks me to assign a drive letter. As I sort of mentioned before, just from a personal preference point of view, I tend to do something called use the drive letter E. I'm then going to hit Next. And then what I want to do is give my disk volume a name. So I'm just going to call this Data and hit Next. And then Finish. So once it's all up and going, I can then exit this menu and you'll see that our disk now appears in the File Explorer. Now, something else that we tend to do is recommend that our clients actually turn off Windows Defender Firewall. This is because it can interfere with our AWS security group rules that we've created. So I'm just going to turn it off, even though it seems a bit strange. So what I'm going to do is search for Windows Defender Firewall. And then I'm going to go to turn Windows Defender Firewall on or off. And then I'm going to turn off, even though it says quite clearly it's not recommended. I'm then going to just hit OK. And then come out of that window. Now, I'm also going to do another thing which may seem a bit strange. What I'm going to do is turn off something called Internet Explorer Enhanced Security. This is a utility attached to Internet Explorer which essentially makes the browser unusable. So to do this, in the Windows search, I'm going to search for Server Manager. I'm then going to open the Server Manager, and at the sort of midway down we have the ability to configure the local server, so I'm going to select local server. And then at the top we have this big properties box, and you'll see that one of the property boxes is called IE Enhanced Security Configuration. What I'm going to do is just flip that from on to off. This will make Internet Explorer a lot easier to use. Now, one final thing that we will often recommend to our clients when they're using Alteryx Server is they create a shared storage area that is visible to both the server machine and to our Alteryx Designer users. This shared drive can be, or this shared space can be extremely useful as a place to store workflow assets such as input datasets or macros which may need to be altered. With AWS, one method to create a shared storage area is via something called S3 or an S3 bucket. If you haven't heard of S3, it's a very similar product to something like Dropbox or Google Drive. So what I'm going to do from this point is demonstrate how to create an S3 bucket and then how to connect our server to the bucket using a tool or utility called Cloudberry. If you have your own network drives or you're not too sure whether this bit will be valuable, then feel free to tune out and just join in for our next video where we'll go over actually installing an Alteryx server. But as I say, I'm now going to create an S3 bucket. So to do that, I'm going to navigate back to the AWS Management Console. Now I'm back in our AWS console, I'm going to create our S3 bucket. To do this, I'm going to search S3 in the services and select just the top one, which is S3. And it's going to take me to the S3 specific management console. What I can do in the top right of this panel is create a brand new bucket. So I'm going to hit create bucket. And then I'm going to give my AWS S3 bucket a name, or my storage area a name. Now, something about this name is that it actually has to be globally unique. So every S3 bucket in the world must have a unique name. So I'm just going to call mine Alteryx Server, if I could spell, demo storage. And I'm going to hope that that is a unique name. I'm going to bring it into the London region, into the subnet 2. You can sort of ignore that, but what I would recommend you do is that you create the bucket in the same region as your server to reduce any network latency. And of course, in a real world environment, and I'm going to do this in this case, I'm also going to block any public access. So no one can actually randomly add things or download things from my bucket. And this is an option which a lot of companies have unchecked, and they leave themselves vulnerable when there's been a lot of data breaches around these rules here. So just be careful with those. I'm then going to just create our bucket. Now, by default, anyone in my IAM organization, i.e. my colleagues, will be able to access this bucket via the console. However, my workflows won't be able to do this. So what I will need to do instead is use a tool called Cloudberry Drive, which allows us to map our S3 bucket to a network drive. But our EC2 instance will still need permissions to do this. So what I'm going to do is create an IAM role, which allows us, or the EC2 instance that exists on our account, to connect to our S3 bucket, which also exists on our account. So to create an IAM role, I'm going to navigate back to the AWS Management Console and navigate to IAM, which sits under Security, Identity, and Compliance. On the panel on the left-hand side, what I can do is hit the Roles option. And then I can select Create Role. Firstly, what we need to do is select the type of object which we want to connect from. In this case, we want to connect from EC2 to S3. So here we're going to select EC2. We can then hit Next Permissions. We can then, now that we can actually configure our permissions, let's search for policies that are relating to accessing S3. So I'm going to search S3 in this box here. And there is one called Amazon S3 Full Access, which is the one I'm going to select in this case. Now, in a real life scenario, you may consider adding further limitations, such as the specific bucket that you want it to connect to, rather than all of the buckets in your account. But in this case, I'm just going to hit Next, Add Tags. I'm then going to add those same project and author tags which I added previously, just to keep some consistency with all the assets that I'm creating. So author Ben Moss, and I'm going to hit Next Review. Now I need to give the role a name, so I'll just call it something like Alteryx Server Demo S3 Connect. And you'll see the role description is sort of generated based on the options that we've selected at the previous step. So allow EC2 instances to call the AWS services or our S3 bucket on our behalf. And then I'm going to go create role. Now that our role has been created, the final step for this part is to attach our newly created IAM role to our EC2 instance. This can be done by simply navigating back to the EC2 console, selecting our instance, and then go to Actions, Instance Settings, Attach/Replace IAM role. At the moment, we've got no roles, so I'm going to do, from the drop down, I'm going to select Alteryx Server Demo S3 Connect, and I'm going to hit Apply. And it says that our IAM role operation has succeeded. Once we've done this, we must then remote back into the server machine to perform our final step, which is to install and configure Cloudberry Drive to actually connect to our S3 bucket. Now we're back on the virtual machine, let's open Internet Explorer and search for Cloudberry Drive. Now, once you load the website, something that's probably important to note is that Cloudberry Drive is a paid service, but for now we can just use the 15-day free trial. So I'm going to enter my email address before I get it right and hit download. It really doesn't take too long to download and install, so I'm just going to hit run. Something it does present you with, is an activation key as well, so just make a note of that. So I'm just going to hit next, agree, and install. And what it says is you have to restart the computer to complete the driver installation. So I'm going to hit OK. I'm not going to choose to run it. I'm going to hit finish. I'm then going to copy my activation key to a text file as well before I restart my machine. So I'll save that. Once that's saved, what you need to do is restart your virtual environment. You can do this either via the AWS console, or you can just restart the server here. Of course, that will then close your remote session, but then you can just remote back into it once it's back up and running again. Once you've restarted your virtual machine, what you're going to want to do is launch Cloudberry Drive so we can configure it. Now, the first thing you're going to get prompted with is the need to give your license key, which I saved before we closed, and just enter your license key alongside your email address and you'll activate your trial. In this case, I've already launched Cloudberry Drive. Now, in the bottom right hand side, we have our system tray, and this is where Cloudberry Drive operates. So any actions or messages are seen in that bottom right section. So to open Cloudberry Drive, what I'm going to do is hit the up arrow, and we'll see the system tray icon for it, which is displayed in a speech bubble. What I'm then going to do is right click, and I'm going to go to options, and this is essentially the Cloudberry configuration window. Now we're going to go to the map drive pane, which is selected by default, and we're going to hit add because we want to create a mapped drive. What we're then going to get asked, if this is the first time we're configuring it, is to select a storage account. Of course, this is the first time we're doing it, so we're going to have to create a new storage account. This is where we specify our S3 credentials, if you like. But we actually have no credential to specify because we used an IAM role policy. So the first thing I'm going to do is just give it a more descriptive display name, and I'm actually going to give it the name of the policy that we set up. So Alteryx Server Demo S3 Connect. And I'm going to check this Use AWS IAM Role Policy option. Now, we actually haven't configured our server to work with SSL yet, so I'm going to uncheck that option, but I'm then just going to hit this test connection. Now, providing we've set up our IAM role correctly, then the connection should be successful, as in this case. So I'm going to hit close and then hit OK. So what we've then done is created a storage account profile. What we now need to do is select the bucket from which that profile can connect to and the drive letter that we want to associate it to. So I'm going to give my drive letter as Z, just from, again, a personal preference point of view, and I'm going to give the volume a label. So I'm just going to call this shared storage. It can be anything you want at this point. The path represents the bucket and potentially the folders within the bucket that we want to connect to. So what I'm going to do is hit the three dots, and it's going to load all of the buckets which my server can connect to via the role policy we set up. And then if I hit the plus icon, we'll see sort of the sub-elements to our overarching single bucket we've set up already. In this case, we don't have any, so I'm just going to select the bucket on the whole and hit OK. And then what we want to do is not fiddle around with the options at the bottom. So we want to make sure this option is checked, so mount this account as a virtual disk at system startup. Otherwise, our Alteryx server won't be able to visibly see the drive. So that's obviously going to cause problems. And then we want to mount it as a network drive. We've got no problem with that. And then just going to hit OK. It then says, do you want to save changes to drive and mount the drive to Z? Of course we do, so we're just going to hit yes. And you'll see in the bottom right that it's mounting the drive, and then once that mounting process is complete, it's going to say mounted. So if we now go to the File Explorer, you'll see that on the left side we have our shared storage drive, and it's mapped to the C disk volume. So if I were to write a file into here, it would automatically be reflected onto our S3 bucket, and then any users that have also done this same process but on their local machine will also have access to that file. So we've created a shared storage area that's visible to everyone. So we've now created our AWS environment, and it's ready for an install of Alteryx Server. We've not necessarily configured all of the nuts and bolts we may want to in a real world scenario, but we've certainly got a good base here, including that shared disk drive that will allow us to create easily shareable assets between both the users and the server machine. And we've also made it open to specific IP addresses in our business, so that those users are able to connect to our server machine. Thank you for tuning into this video. In the next video, we're going to actually look at the install and configuration of the Alteryx Server product. Thank you.